But there are good and righteous people who are trying to serve God apart from Jesus Christ, outside of Jesus Christ, without even acknowledging Jesus as the Son of God, let alone obeying His gospel. And we have to understand that God has declared that if you want salvation, you have to do this through Jesus. It's not enough to simply call Him God. You have to be a person who surrenders to Jesus if you want to be set free from sin. Now, I know that still is it's okay to say that now in our nation, but you can see it on the horizon. The time's coming when there are going to be fewer and fewer people who will have the courage to say that you have to be in Christ to be saved. Because there is a great threat in our nation to saying that Christianity is the only way to heaven. And you can see that coming. But understand this, from God's perspective, He has a side. And if we're going to serve God, then we must be in Christ. And until I'm willing to obey that gospel, I'm not on the Lord's side. Because just being a good, righteous man is not enough. Apollos was already that. Cornelius was already that. But they had to be in Christ to be right with God. So choose a side. Choose the Lord's side, I should say. The second point we can see about the Lord's side is that we must choose a side. That God doesn't let us simply live any way we want to live and still be okay with Him. Apollos, again, a good man, but he had to surrender all the way to the Lord's will. And that is based on the principle that we can't have two masters. Okay? Jesus Himself said that you cannot serve Him and this world. Okay? You cannot love God and the world. You have to pick a side. In Matthew chapter 6 and verse 24, He states it this way. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So, of course, even in a practical sense, a slave could not have two masters. Okay, you couldn't belong to two different owners. You belong to one, and you were to show your allegiance to the one that you belong to, right? Well, Jesus says the same thing is true with Him. That we cannot be people who say, okay, I pledge allegiance to the Lord, and yet we still live as if the world is our God and we're more concerned about it than we are about serving our God. And you just can't do that. You've got to pick a side. God's already shown us how His people have tried this before. When He judged His people years ago, one of the things that developed among the people who were led into Assyrian captivity is that they tried to serve God and the gods of the world. They tried to fuse these thoughts together, these doctrines together, and it did not work. In 2 Kings chapter 17, notice the language of how these people were trying to do this. They were trying to worship God, and then they were trying to worship the things of the world and bring them all together, and all it did was corrupt them and lead them farther and farther away from God. In 2 Kings chapter 17, it says in verses 32 and 33, they feared the Lord, and from every class they appointed for themselves priests of the high places who sacrificed for them in the shrines of the high places. They feared the Lord, yet served their own gods, according to the rituals of the nations, from among whom they were carried away. So God had a special pattern, special plan for His people, and that was, of course, the priests would come from a special tribe. They decided, okay, let's just modify this, okay? Let's change things up, priests from anywhere, and then let's worship God, but let's also have some of this worldliness stuff and bring it all together, and let's just redefine all this, and everything's going to be okay. And it did not work. It only corrupted them even more. That's how it has to be with us. Okay, my mindset has to be that I'm going to serve God, and it doesn't matter what the sacrifice is. I'm going to serve Him. I'm going to declare myself a servant of His, and I'm not going to try and love the world and love God at the same time. All that does is betray the Lord. What comes to mind? Let's ask it this way. When you hear the name Benedict Arnold, okay, in our nation, what comes to mind when you think of that name? And without question, It goes back to the act of betrayal. And here's a man who was in charge of West Point,